Good film? Let me show you something before I really dig in here. The man on the left is Fred Gamble. I'll tell you a little bit about him in a moment. The man on the right is the one and only Chuck Schrodel. That is his 1956 Corvette. Chuck was a U.S. service member, military policeman stationed in Europe, and he pulled that car over because he wanted to have a close look at it on base and ended up buying it. And that car was the camera car for the Le Mans film. If you recall, in the very beginning of the film, when the cars went out for practice, there was a sequence where the number 4 Camoradi car was driving and there was a camera car obviously trailing it. That was Chuck's car. And that is, I believe, Chuck at the wheel of the race car. And you see a cameraman on the right side there. So we're really blessed to have him here all these many years later to help tell this story. The story of the Camoradi team and the Camoradi Corvettes begins with the gentleman who we see in profile here with his head looking down. His name was Lloyd Lucky Kastner. He was born in New York City in 1928. Very bright guy, but above all else, he had an unbreakable power to convince anybody to do anything that he wanted. He was alternately referred to as a genius and a consummate con man. He was graduated from the University of Miami with a degree in business administration, decided he wanted to be an airline pilot, got the training, got the license, and went to work for Pan American Airways around 1950. And he flew for them for 4 years, got interested in racing, did some SCCA club racing. Pan Am changed his route. He used to fly to South America, from Miami to South America. They wanted him to fly transatlantic, and he didn't want to do it, so he quit. It's a little gray how this happened, but he ended up a Cadillac dealer in Miami. And he sold new cars, used cars, and that only exacerbated his interest in racing. He got more and more involved, and unfortunately, his tastes in race cars far exceeded his ability to buy them, so he got the bright idea to convince other people to pay for his Ferraris and his Maseratis. And in March of 1959, at an SCCA club race in Opelika Naval, on the Naval Air Station there, he grabbed the announcer's microphone and he welcomed anybody who wanted to join him as a member of his racing club to help fund his way to Europe so he could race at Le Mans, the Nürburgring, Targa Florio, everywhere else. And that was met with some scorn because he was talking to racers, any one of whom would have gladly welcomed the opportunity to go to Europe on somebody else's dime. But never underestimate, again, the power of Lucky Kastner. I'll tell you one super quick story about him that really summarizes his persuasive powers. At one point, later on, he convinced the Dow Chemical Company to be his racing sponsor. At that time, Dow Chemical was the world's largest producer of automotive antifreeze. Lucky Kastner was racing air-cooled Porsches. So one person at that race who didn't laugh at Lucky was a man named Fred Gamble. Fred was a young journalist, a recent college grad, and an avid racer, and he thought this whole thing sounded like a grand adventure. So he approached Lucky and said, "Hey, I'm in. I'll fund my own way. I want to go with you to Europe and service your PR guy. I'll pay for everything, and I'll just make my own way doing magazine stories about the racing." Lucky took him up on his offer, but instead of having him tag along as the PR guy, he said, we're going to be essentially partners in this. Fred Gamble wrote a proposal. Took several weeks and crafted a beautiful sponsorship proposal. He envisioned this as sort of like the American Olympic team of racing, and he knew, because he knew Lucky Kastner, that if anybody could sell it, it was him. Lucky Kastner and Fred took the proposal, and they, without that much effort, landed Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company as a primary sponsor. Goodyear promised money, tires, technical support, and Lucky Kastner then leveraged that. He had Goodyear Tire. This must be a legitimate operation, right? He had no money, no cars, no team, but he had Goodyear tires. That was in March of 1959. By the summer, he had arranged a meeting with Ed Cole and Zora Duntov. Ed Cole was then the general manager of Chevrolet, and Duntov was not yet chief engineer. I think his title at that time was director of high performance cars for Chevrolet. And a marriage was made in heaven. Chevrolet agreed to provide Camoradi Racing with 2 Corvettes, 2 complete competition prepped cars, Rochester fuel injection, 4-speed, posi rear, heavy-duty brake and suspension, 24-gallon fuel tanks, wide wheels, and those cars were delivered through Don Stevens Chevrolet in Miami. And the dealership initially did the race preparation. Those cars had a shakedown in Daytona Beach on Daytona Speedway. Where are we? And from there, they got loaded on a boat and went to Havana, Cuba for the what was called the Gran Premio de la Havana. It was a major GT race in Cuba before trouble really broke out there. Jim Jeffords drove one of the Camoradi cars to a GT win there, and the team was off and running. After the race in Cuba, the next event was the 12 Hours of Sebring, and that was another epic event at the time. Then as now, it was America's premier endurance race. It was the birthplace of American endurance racing. And by 1960, it was a major event that attracted competitors from all over the world. Fred Gamble was the team manager at that point, and he filled out the paperwork and he put himself down as a reserve driver. He told me it was really just for a laugh. He wanted to see his name in the program. He never expected to drive. The contracted driver for that car, Skip Hudson, didn't show. So Lucky Kastner said to Fred, if you want to drive it, drive it. Fred Gamble drove. Jim Jeffords was in the other car in the opening hour. Jim Jeffords' car had an issue, probably a valve train failure of some sort. It wouldn't rev over 5,000 RPMs. He was the star racer, so he came in with a broken car. Fred Gamble was ordered to bring his car in and turn it over to Jim Jeffords, which was a crushing blow. But the team's chief mechanic, Lee Lilly, said to Fred, well, the other car's still running. If you want to mosey around until it blows up, be my guest. So Fred got in that car, drove it carefully, and it just kept on going and going and going. The end of that story is that car finished the race with one driver, Fred Gamble, and I believe it is only the second occurrence in Sebring history where one person drove the entire 12 hours. The car had one problem. It had a fuel line fail, and they borrowed a fuel line off of a production Corvette, finished the race, and then removed the fuel line to give it back to the guy who owned it. The next morning, a mechanic with the team went to move that car. It had no fuel line on it. He cranked it, it sprayed fuel all over, the car caught fire, and it burned to the ground. So that Camoradi Corvette, sadly, is no longer with us. The other surviving car is the car that is here with us today and that went on to lead a most remarkable life. After Sebring, it was entered in the Targa Florio, which was, by any account, the most difficult, dangerous, treacherous race in the world at the time. It was held on public roads in the mountains of Sicily, and one lap took almost 45 miles. And they ended the race shortly after because so many people ended up getting killed there, drivers, spectators. It unfortunately did not get to Italy in time for that race. So it missed the Targa Florio, and it's kind of sad to think it didn't have that race, doesn't have that race on its resume now, but it's also probably a good thing because that race was so dangerous and the Corvette was relatively heavy and relatively powerful. And we might not be here tonight if it got to the Targa Florio because there was probably better than a 50-50 chance that it would have crashed there. After the Targa Florio, it went to the Nürburgring, and after that, where it did compete, the only solid axle car to compete at the Nürburgring, it went to Le Mans. You know the story of how it did at Le Mans. Obviously, there were very, very few Corvettes in the early days that competed there, let alone finished there. So that was a truly remarkable accomplishment and a testament to, of course, the good wrenching of our friend Chuck and the good driving of, again, Fred Gamble and Lee Lilly. And after Le Mans, the car went to Sweden, where it competed in the Swedish Grand Prix. And I think Lucky Kasna drove it there, and he actually won the GT category there in the car. The day after the race, Joe Bonnier, who, get him back up. The sinister-looking man in the trench coat is Joe Bonnier. He was Sweden's first Formula One driver and the first Swede to win a Formula One race, so he was quite a star at the time. He drove the Corvette to several new national speed records for production cars on public roads in Sweden. And it was a great publicity venture for Camoradi and for Chevrolet as well. After that, the car's next stop was Goodwood for the Tourist Trophy in England. And the team did not own a trailer. They had a 59 Ford station wagon that they used to haul tools and spares, and the car was driven from one race to the next. So Fred Gamble was in the station wagon, and a man named Bob Wallace was driving the Corvette. Bob Wallace was an Australian who wrenched on the car. He was hired as a mechanic before Le Mans and was to stay with the team the rest of the season. Bob Wallace was at the wheel of the Corvette. They stopped for lunch, and according to Fred Gamble, Bob Wallace maybe had one or too many drinks, and he fell asleep at the wheel, and he crashed the Corvette while still in Sweden. He went off the road into a ditch and rolled several times, landed on its wheels, but as you can see, it was very, very badly damaged. Bob Wallace went off to the hospital, was okay. The car ended up in a garage in the town where it crashed. Fred Gamble and Bob Wallace removed the engine and transmission, which they deemed to be the only pieces left of any use. And because they were treated well by the local police, they simply gave the car to the first policeman who showed up at the accident scene. And they presumed that he would maybe keep a few pieces, maybe sell a few pieces off of it, because the car was sort of now famous in Sweden. It was a new national speed record holder driven by a Formula One star. So off they went, and that was thought to be the end of the Camoradi Corvette. As an aside, another point of interest, the engine and transmission went back to the team's shop in Modena, and Fred Gamble and Bob Wallace quickly sold it to a guy named Hans Tanner. Hans Tanner had a business called Tecmac. He was an American, and he had this agency that served as an intermediary between overseas enthusiasts who owned Ferraris and Maseratis and the factories. So if you were an American or a Canadian or a New Zealander or a Frenchman and you didn't speak Italian and you couldn't deal with the Ferrari factory, you had Hans Tanner, and you'd send your Ferrari to him and he would bring it to the factory, and he would, of course, be paid for that service. A gentleman sent Hans a 250F Maserati, a Formula One Grand Prix Maserati, that was supposed to go to the Maserati factory to get rebuilt. Hans Tanner decided the car really should have an American V8. So he had Bob Wallace and Fred Gamble install the Corvette's engine into this Grand Prix Maserati, and then he sold the car to a guy in New Zealand. It wasn't his car to sell, but he sold it anyway. The Maserati was uncontrollable. It had wrong weight distribution and too much power, and it was wrecked. The engine came out of the Maserati, went into an offshore racing boat. That boat sunk, and that engine, as far as we know, is still at the bottom of the Mediterranean?
No, it's off the coast of Australia somewhere.
Off the coast of Australia. The engine is still there. If anybody's ambitious and wants maybe to get the original engine for Dominick's car, you know where it is. So we fast forward. This was in August of 1960. Fast forward 30 years, and there's a man named Loren Lundberg. He lives in Glendale, Arizona. He was a Corvette enthusiast and a friend of mine, a good guy and an epic character. He got involved in organizing a race car display for an NCRS Southwest chapter meet, and he had a list of some people to call to ask if they would be kind enough to bring their race cars for this display. On that list was a man named Mike Pillsbury. Mike Pillsbury, another character, one day was in a junkyard in Southern California, and he saw the remains of a 1960 Corvette, and Mike Pillsbury was a Corvette expert, and though the car was in very, very rough shape, he knew that he was looking at something special. It was a heavy-duty brake and suspension fuel-injected Corvette that at one time had had a 37-gallon gas tank in it. And Mike Pillsbury knew that the 37-gallon tank was not a production item. They were made by Chevrolet. About a dozen of these were made. And they went to Briggs Cunningham's team, and they went to the Camoradi team for Le Mans. The tank was made for Le Mans. That car turned out to be the #2 Cunningham car. Mike Pillsbury took it out of the junkyard, researched it, verified it, restored it, and Loren Lundberg called him to see if he would be so kind as to bring his car to this display, this NCRS display. And in the course of the conversation, Pillsbury said, "Hey, you live in Glendale, Arizona, you must know Bob Wallace." And Loren Lundberg said, "I don't know Bob Wallace. Who's Bob Wallace?" And Mike Pillsbury said, "Oh, Bob Wallace was involved with Le Mans. He was one of the mechanics with the Camoradi team, and he's got a shop. He's got a foreign car shop in Phoenix." So Loren Lundberg's ears perked up, and he said, "I'm going to pay Bob Wallace a visit." Bob Wallace, as I said, was an Australian. He lived in Italy for more than 15 years. After Camoradi, he went to work for an Italian team racing Ferraris. And in 1964, he went to work for Lamborghini initially as a mechanic, but quickly rose in that organization, that organization to become the chief test driver and a very influential person at Lamborghini. So over the next 10 years, from 1965 until 1975, he profoundly influenced every car that Lamborghini made. In 1975, Ferruccio Lamborghini sold the company, and Bob Wallace didn't want to stay with new owners, so he quit. And he and his wife considered going back to Australia, staying in Italy, and just like that, they decided America's where they ought to be. and they had no connection, no reason to go any one particular place. They wanted to go someplace warm, and they wanted to go someplace with a decent population concentration because he intended to open up an independent Ferrari shop. They picked Phoenix, Arizona. So the same Bob Wallace that wrenched on and crashed the Camoradi Corvette ended up in Phoenix, Arizona. Loren Lundberg was 10 minutes away, went to see him, and Bob Wallace pulled that photo out of his desk drawer and said this was the end of the car. And Loren Lundberg questioned him, said, is it really the end? Maybe it survived, maybe somebody fixed it. And Bob Wallace said, honestly, I don't know. Told him the story. We gave it to the cop, last I saw of it, but look at it. I doubt it survived. Well, Loren Lundberg became focused. Let's just say that. Anybody see the John Wick movies? Yeah, Loren Lundberg was the John Wick of Corvette people. He was determined to find out if this car survived, and if it didn't, where it ended up. And again, this was 1990, no internet. He had to do it the old-fashioned way. He had some names. He had a country, last known in Sweden. Bob Wallace said Fred Gamble was really the key. He kind of ran the whole operation, and he's somebody you should speak with. But he didn't know where he was. He hadn't spoken with him in 30 years. All he remembered was that Fred Gamble was involved with skiing in Colorado. So Loren Lundberg contacted ski resorts, ski associations, ski magazines, trying to find Fred Gamble. No luck. Then one day, Loren Lundberg was putting away some old issues of Road and Track magazine and thumbing through them, and something caught his eye in an old issue of Road and Track. It was a letter to the editor from somebody named Fred Gamble. And it gave his city in the state of Colorado. Loren Lundberg called information, got Fred Gamble's phone number and address. Sent him a letter asking him 6 questions about the Camoradi Corvette. Didn't know if he'd get a response. A few days later, he got an 8-page letter that started with, well, you asked for it, you're going to get it. Fred Gamble, who passed away only a few months ago, had almost a photographic memory, and this was his life. After Camoradi, he went to work for Goodyear Tire and Rubber as their race operations manager. He set up their whole race operations in Europe and was intimately involved with virtually every form of racing in the 60s into the 70s, land speed racing with Craig Breedlove. He was part of Ford's effort at Le Mans, Carroll Shelby, Shelby American, all the Cobra racing. And he saved all his stuff and he remembered everything. He didn't know where the car ended up. He, like Bob Wallace, presumed that it just ended up thrown away because look at it. Well, Loren Lundberg wrote scores of letters. He contacted the Swedish embassy. He got a map out. He looked at the most likely route from the location in Sweden where the car had raced to Goodwood in England. He wrote the Swedish consulate and asked for every police agency on that route. He asked his brother to help. Lundberg's his name. They were of Swedish ancestry. His brother was involved with the Town and Country Club, the Chrysler Town and Country Club, Woody station wagons. His brother happened to know a club member in Sweden, gave Loren the guy's contact information. Loren contacted him. It took a while, but that man sent Loren information about the police agencies and about how accident reports are made. Ultimately, he wrote letters to every police agency that could have possibly taken the accident report. This is, again, at this point, it was about 32 years later. Lucky Loren, one of his letters landed in the hands of a man named Stig Johansson, of course, Everybody in Sweden's named Johansson. Stig was a car enthusiast and a police officer, and he was determined to help Loren. It was the agency that took the report. The report was still in the files, complete with photos and a detailed account of what had happened, and the name of the police officer who had written the report, who was the police officer who was given the car. Loren did make contact with him. He had given the car to the shop where it landed, and he never saw the car again 6 months later. It was still there as far as he knew 6 months later. After that, he lost contact with it. But Loren had renewed hope and renewed enthusiasm because now he knew the car had not simply been disposed of immediately. It was still alive 6 months later. And if you look at what was there, you have to say, well, maybe somebody did try to fix this car. So endless letters and endless efforts later, Loren Lundberg found the car. Stig Johansson, the police officer who made it his business to help Loren, ended up, I believe, this was never acknowledged, but Loren, the last thing Loren asked him for was, can you give me a list, the whereabouts of every 1960 Corvette that is road registered on the road in Sweden? Stig's reply was, a letter several weeks later, I have better news than that. Not only do you not need every 1960 Corvette that's registered in Sweden, I found the car. It is the car, and it was the car. This is just some of the paperwork. There are, I think, a couple of hundred letters in the file related to Loren's search for this car. Whoop, there we go. That's what the car looked like in 1995 when Loren finally did find it. The garage owner presumably sold it. It went to an enthusiast who more or less put it back together. It was obviously very difficult to source Corvette parts in Sweden and to come to any understanding of how the cars were originally put together and where you could get new parts for them. And so the owner presumably did the best that he could, and he basically glued the shattered body back together and got the car basically back together and I believe on the road again. He kept it for some time, he sold it, and a subsequent owner decided the car needed to be properly restored. He took it apart to restore it and never got any further than that. And that's the man that Loren Lundberg made contact with. It was in Stockholm, Sweden at that point. Remarkably, because the car only had a couple of owners after Camoradi, and because parts were not readily available, nobody threw anything out. They saved, the guys that owned this car saved everything. That is one of the factory Chevrolet Engineering 37-gallon gas tanks. Interestingly, you'll see this sort of square protrusion that was not part of the original tank. As Dick Thompson told us in the video, Lamar was full of very strict rules about adding water, adding oil, and there was a rule about adding gasoline. The car had to make a certain minimum number of laps before fuel could be added, and those little fuel-injected Chevy V8s were very thirsty, and even with 37 gallons of fuel, the car could not make the minimum number of laps, so they actually extended the fuel tanks for Le Mans. That is the heavy-duty brake option. The backing plate's different, the brake pads are different, the hub is different. All of the hardware is different, the wheel cylinder is different, not being reproduced, not available, very hard to find. These parts were still with the car. The car still retained its original chassis, its heavy-duty brake and suspension setup, specially built original Coney racing shocks, the 37-gallon fuel tank. So there was a lot there of value, but as you could see in the photo, it needed a major restoration. That's the car on its way to the port in, well, it was loaded in a shipping container in Sweden, and then it went to Germany, where it was put on a ship bound for Long Beach, California. So here we are. This was 1995. This was 35 years after the car left the United States. It was back home. And that is Loren Lundberg in the middle, with two friends of his who they recognized an epic adventure when they saw one. So Loren picked the car up in the port in Long Beach, and he drove it 400 miles across California, across the Mojave Desert, and halfway across Arizona to get back to his home in Glendale. The car had traveled 5,500 miles to get to Glendale, Arizona, and Loren proceeded to restore it in his garage. And I just want to point out that black cylinder is a very large can of fiberglass resin. Loren had a lot of work to do, and he richly deserved owning that car after all the effort that he put in to find it, get it back to the United States, and then restore it. And he was a fixture at Corvette shows for the next almost 30 years that he owned the car. And I'll tell you one story about Loren that sort of summarizes him. It's like Lucky Kasner and the antifreeze sponsorship for his air-cooled Porsches. Loren loved that car so much, and he was a wacky guy. He was a brilliant guy and super devoted to the car. He had a giant chain. It looked like it was holding the boat anchor on the ship that brought the car back to the United States. And at the car shows, overnight, he would chain his Corvette to a utility pole or something because he loved the car so much he was worried somebody might swipe it. So that brings us to Dominick Testa. Loren passed away in 2021. His family decided to sell the car, and its next caretaker is the gentleman sitting here, Dominick. I'll let you hear the story from his lips. I'm not sure that he knew what he was getting involved with or exactly what inspired him to buy that car, but I can tell you that he is every bit as devoted and in love with the car and the story and the people that it's brought him in contact with, as was Loren Lundberg. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Testa to tell us his story.
Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Kip, for inviting us. Thanks to the Research Center for putting up with Chuck, all the emails and phone calls and everything else that it took to put this all together. And it's just a great car. It's a wonderful story. That's a Richard Prince photo. It's an awesome picture. You know, we talk so much about restoring cars and what's correct and, you know, all the specifications and you know, colors and hose clamps and fonts for race car numbers and all that. And to me, the car is so much more than that. It's the people and the places that it's been to and all the things that I've learned since being involved with it. it's more than just one of the two cars that finished Le Mans. It raced in Havana at a time in 1960 when Castro was just taking over in Cuba. The last time that there was an international race in Cuba. Jim Jeffords, who was a great race car driver, drove it to great success in Cuba. It represented, you know, to me, it represents like the American dream. You think in 1960 and Kennedy and saying we're going to make it to the moon and back, and all of the, you know, the things that were going on in the world at the time. The United States puts together a team of 4 Corvettes, never happened before, sends them over to race at Le Mans against Ferrari and Maserati and all these other cars, and does remarkably well. Of the 4 cars that went there, it's one of the 2 that completed the 24 hours. All the other races, to its credit, raced at the Nürburgring, the only straight axle Corvette ever to race at the Nürburgring. And Sebring, Iron Man Gamble, was his nickname because he refused to get out of the car. And he raced the entire 12 hours. Iron Man Gamble. I mean, these people are like cartoon characters. They're like, you know, mythical figures, you know, in all of our lives. Fred Gamble went on to work for Goodyear. If you look over in the research center, there's pictures of Fred Gamble with Bruce McLaren and Dan Gurney and A.J. Foyt. You know, all these people that were wrapped up in racing at the time. You know, and Fred Gamble was right there in the middle of it. And to me, the biggest part of this story is after finding the car, and very frankly, I got involved with the car kind of like on a whim. It was for sale. It was kind of lingering around for a little bit. It didn't sell immediately. Loren had passed away. His wife was kind of aggravated with having it in the garage. She wanted it out of there. And, you know, it really was just an accident getting involved with it. But getting to know Fred Gamble, who, after a couple of years of speaking with him on a regular basis, we became like friends. And, you know, the stories and the places he had been, and things he had done, and the stuff that he had collected over the years, it's just amazing. Most of his archives are at the research center right next door, and they're all there, and I'm sure they'll be happy to share them with you. But he did hold on to some stuff, and every now and again, I would get something in the mail, and just like these little dribs and drabs of photos and notes and things like that. And one day I get something in the mail, and it's a picture of Craig Breedlove standing next to the Spirit of America, signed by Fred Gamble. And you know, he was responsible with Goodyear for developing the tires that the Spirit of America set the land speed record at the time. We might have the picture.
Yeah, somewhere, probably.
But anyway, so as I got to know him, he was, at the time, he was around 90 years old. He was living by himself in Honolulu. After he sold his skiing business in Colorado, we moved to Honolulu. And the whole thing was kind of odd to me. He was 90 years old. He lived by himself. And every now and again, I would get things in the mail from him, and I couldn't quite understand it. And one day I was talking to him, and I said, Fred, why are you sending me this stuff? I mean, you know, he had a son, he had a brother. Don't you think this stuff should be with them? And he was like, nah, my son really never really cared too much about, you know, what I did, and, you know, all of this stuff. And you have the car, I would really rather you have it. And I have an amazing assortment of these little dribs and drabs of stuff that didn't make it to the research center archives that he sent me. And because he was getting older and I was kind of worried about him, I would call him every Saturday afternoon. He was in Honolulu. We were here in New York. around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd call him up, which was like 10 o'clock in the morning his time, and we would just chat for a little bit. And he would tell me some stories, and, you know, every now and again he'd remember something and say, oh, you know, by the way, here's this Walt Arfon story, or, you know, here's, you know, whatever. And one day I called him on a Saturday afternoon, and he didn't pick up the phone. I thought, well, you know, maybe he was busy doing something or in the bathroom, or, you know, who knows what. I didn't want to bother him. I waited an hour or so. I called him again, and he didn't pick up the phone. And said, you know what, I'll wait till tomorrow. I'll try him again tomorrow. So I called him, the number on, and he had no cell phone. He had no computer, no cell phone, no, he didn't like any of that stuff. I just called him on his landline in his apartment. And Sunday came and went, didn't pick up the phone. So like a week goes by, and I'm sitting at the kitchen counter with my wife, and I'm like, I can't get a hold of Fred. I don't know what's going on. So I tried him again, and she says, well, you know, maybe we should try and call somebody to see if he's okay. So I ended up calling the Waikiki Police Department, which had a substation right around the corner from where he lived, and they were happy enough to send a police officer to do a well check on him. And it turned out he had slipped and fell and wasn't feeling too good, and he was, you know, they found him in his chair, and he's like, no, I'm okay. And the police officer handed my cell phone to him, and I talked to him for a couple of minutes, and yeah, that was that. But that's, to me, what this car is all about. You know, it's, you know, we all talk about restoring cars and painting cars and all this other stuff. It's all these people. And as Richard had said, Loren Lundberg, kind of a wacky guy, kept meticulous records, unbelievably meticulous records in his search to find this car. And what I would do, so when I went to buy the car, his wife wanted the car out of the garage, and she said, you know, I have all this other stuff. If you don't take it with you in the car, I'm just throwing it out, because I've been stepping over it for the last 20 years. I want it out of here. So I open up one of the boxes and I look at it, and it's photographs, and it's correspondences, and it's telegrams, and it's this and that. And I'm like, throw it out. You know, with the reliable car carrier is out in front of the house, and I'm putting stuff in the trunk and throwing things on the front seat and filling up plastic bags with stuff and putting it under the engine compartment. So now so the car gets home, now I have these piles of papers. No rhyme or reason to any of it. So what I would do is every day on my way to work, I would just grab a handful of this stuff and I would take it with me. And I tried to organize it and get it in some sort of date order or subject order or whatever. And I'm flipping through the stuff one day. Now, my office was in Westchester at the time. So I'm flipping through the papers one day, and there's a letter in his stuff. And in the sidebar of the letter was some handwritten notes and whatever, and a man's name and a telephone number. And the man's name was Chuck Schrodel, with a phone number. And it had an address, Bedford, New York. Well, I was in Valhalla in Westchester, and Bedford is probably 10 miles away. So I'm sitting in my office, Chuck is sitting at home, I have the car, he was there at Le Mans in 1960, and I have a cell phone number. And I'm like, this can't even really be. What could it hurt? Let me call the number. I dial it up, 2 or 3 rings later, he answers the phone, Chuck Schrodel. I'm like, excuse me, but are you Chuck Schrodel that was at Le Mans in 1960? And he's like, yeah, what's it to you? And it's the start of a beautiful friendship. And we've become fast friends, and I try and travel around with him as much as we can. And we've done a lot of things together, and we've talked a lot together, and he's told me a lot of the things that he's done. Amazing guy, from race car driver, military police officer, New York Rangers goalie. I mean, it's just amazing. So yeah, the car's great. restorations are great, paint jobs are really cool. Black and white tires, black and white rims on the car, really cool. That's a story. I asked Fred Gamble one day. Fred used to talk. He was a journalist and wrote lots of articles. And every time you asked him something, it was like a 2-hour explanation. So I said, Fred, what's the deal? And I was kind of intimidated by him because it was Fred Gamble. I said, Fred, what's the deal with the black and white rims that you see in all the pictures? Thinking I'm going to get this, and he was the Goodyear guy, right? Some sort of technical explanation on why it was whatever. And he says, that's all we could get our hands on. And I'm like, what? That's all you could get? What do you? And that was it. That's all we could get our hands on. So that's what it's about to me. You know, the people that I met, Richard Prince did a wonderful article in Corvette magazine, took awesome pictures. We talk Corvette and lots of other stuff all the time.
Dogs.
Dog, yeah, buckwheat. Kip and everybody at the research center. Chuck, I can't thank you enough for all you do for me every day, every minute. My wife for putting up with me. It's just been more than I could have ever hoped for. And unfortunately, as Richard mentioned, Fred passed away a couple of months ago. And I think you were probably the last person to have any kind of in-depth conversation with him when you were doing the research for the article. Yeah. And I'm really happy you got a chance to talk to him. He was an incredible character. You know, the stuff that legends are made of. And that's what it's about to me. It's about the people. And the car's great, people are better. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dominic. Next up is, I would have to say, the star of our show. It's simply amazing that somebody is with us who was at that race in 1960 and who was an integral part of it. And as I said, it was a very unlikely sequence of events. The whole car story is an unlikely sequence of events. And how Chuck Schrodel ended up in Le Mans and a Corvette enthusiast is equally unlikely. I'll ask Chuck to come up here and tell us a little something of his story, how he ended up with the Corvette that he owned and how he ended up at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1960. I can tell you the days are long gone when you can just show up on a whim and find yourself crewing on one of the entrants there. It's not happening anymore, but it was entirely possible in 1960. And Chuck Schrodel is the man who did it.
Had to wear the hat. So it just kind of sets the stage. First of all, if it wasn't for Loren Lundberg and Dom Testa there, I don't want to get emotional. He's responsible for that Corvette living and what Loren went through to get that car. And then to sit there and watch Dickie Thompson, the dentist, you all probably knew he was a dentist, to watch him with his white shirt like I wear. Well, you know I was in the Army. We continued back I went into the late 50s. You can always tell by the shirt. I'm looking at Dickie Thompson and the film. And the car is next door. The same car that he's talking about is next door. It's not possible. And then with Fred Gamble, I come to find out later, I majored in journalism at the University of Florida. I went in after the Army in 1966. Is when I got out, and I entered in 1961. I was a journalism major, as was Fred. And I didn't really put this together. There was no reason to put this together. But I remember some of my professors saying, you know, geez, 8 years ago, there was another guy that went through school here. And he used to write about the same things you write about. You know, drafting at Daytona, things like that having to do with cars. Okay, and that's fine. And then I come to find out as we progress, he also went to the University of Florida, as did I. And it's just very, very hard to believe. How did I get involved with Corvettes? I'm a Corvette man. We got a bunch of Corvette people here. As an MP in Orléans, France, Orléans is the proper way you pronounce it. I pulled a lieutenant colonel over in the car. We all right?
Yeah, we just want you to speak.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Oh, good. Oh, good.
Speak into the microphone.
I pulled the colonel over and I walked up to the window of the car, you know, and I saluted him. And he looked at me, he said, what did I do? What did I do? I said, Colonel, you didn't do anything. I want to know if you're interested in selling the car. And he looked at me and he said, you know, it's funny you say that. I just remarried and I inherited 2 kids. And he says, you can see there's one seat here, a wife. Yes, I will sell you the car. 3 weeks later, I own the car in France, a 56 Corvette. And it came from his brother, and it was loaded. It had all the right stuff. It was a 3-speed. There was no such thing as you know as a 4-speed when we had in the 56. So I got the car in heaven, because I was a gearhead in high school, as we all are. Every one of you is a gearhead. My gearhead part was motorcycles. And when I went to Europe, I had the idea of being a motorcycle champion racer. So the time goes by, and I had been in the hospital. And by the way, the hospital that I was at was in Orléans, France. Walt Hansken, do we all know Walt Hansken? Sure. Your hands up if you've heard of him. Oh God, I mean, this is an unbelievable person. One of the things on our post was the hospital at La Chapelle. And we had to guard that hospital, and we had other posts. I was at COMZ headquarters. It turns out that Walt Hansken had a very bad accident at Le Mans testing. They airlifted him to my hospital through the same gates and everything. So a lot of these things are starting to come together. So I got sick, and I ended up in that hospital 16 straight days on my back with mono and a closed throat. I woke up on the 17th day. I was virtually perfect. And the doctor said, that's what's going to happen. I got 2 weeks leave out of this. And I was hoping that I would be able to go to Le Mans, but I was on my back for the 59 Le Mans. So time goes by. The following April comes up, and I said, I know there's a testing day at Le Mans. So I went to the testing day. I had my Corvette, and you can go anywhere in France in those years in a 56 Corvette, because you must beat somebody. You have to. So I got to Le Mans. The first person I run into is Briggs Cunningham, and he's there doing that testing that you heard about. And one of the things that came up, and we hit it off, it was very nice. You know, I was in the military. I'm young. I'm like 21 years old, 22 years old. And he said to one of his mechanics, you know, if we have a problem with the engines, here's the engine that we can use in this Corvette. And the mechanic says, Briggs, it's a 265. You can't put that in our Corvette. So that was my first inkling of Le Mans. I had known about Le Mans, and I was so psyched. I couldn't believe that I was there. So time goes by, June comes up, and I'm going to Le Mans with my Corvette. And at that point is when I hooked up with the Camoradi Corvette. And all the cars were together, as you know. The Cunningham car, in that garage you saw that one picture. they weren't really showing the Camoradi car, but it was there. So I'm a gopher. I'm not a mechanic. I am a gopher. I really am so uncelebrity, it's unbelievable. The only celebrity part that I have is I'm the only living person who sat in that car and drove it at Le Mans, be it only in reverse and first. But I did drive it. So, you know, they say, Chuck, because they saw I had the Corvette, so I must know what I'm doing, right? So hop in the car, just back it up. We got to do this, we got to do that, and pull it up. So I did drive the car. So they said, do you want to pit? At the end of the Mulsanne Straight, we all know the Mulsanne Straight's the longest straightaway, a sharp right-hand turn where every car was required to have a shovel, right? If you missed the turn, you'd end up in the sandbank. And so the birdcage Maseratis and the Corvette would be signaled at the end of the Mulsanne Straight. The cars would come around the corner, and there, you know, you would hold out the signs, etc. The whole 24 hours. It rained early, and that was at that age. What do you care? You're in the Army, it rains. So we go through the 24 hours, and I really didn't know quite what was happening. You couldn't get near the place. So I had my car, we had the Ford station wagon, so it was kind of time to go home, and that was my big experience at Le Mans. Well, life goes on. I went to work, I got a job with IBM, I graduated from the University of Florida, and in 1995, the phone rings. And I pick it up, Chuck Schrodel. He says, are you the Chuck Schrodel that was at Le Mans, France? I said, yes, who is this? It was Loren. He says, I have that Corvette. Well, I didn't know what had happened to it. I mean, there's no way. He explained what had happened, and he says, can you give me some tips on the car? And I really couldn't. I just had such vague memories. I remember we put the lights on the door to light up the number. Chuck, so go see if you can find some wire from Cunningham. See if you can get this. So I was a total gopher. But there I was with these Corvettes and my baby sitting outside. So that really opened the doors for me. So now, I didn't add much to the table, but he ended up, I have that letter that he wrote me, which Dom has, explaining, can you answer these questions, which I really couldn't do. So I only talked to him twice, and I always wondered, I said, I wonder whatever happened to him as the years went by. We get into 1960, 2020, etc. The years go by, and I kind of lost track of what had happened. Until the phone rings again. You know, deja vu. I pick up the phone, Chuck Schrodel. He says, are you the Chuck Schrodel? You can't make it up. And it was Dom. He says, well, I have the car. You got to be kidding. So he explained what had happened. So he says, would you like to do a couple of shows? And the first show, one of the first shows was in Armonk. Yeah. I live in Bedford. It's like it's actually 7.5 miles from Bedford to Armonk. And I was that's where IBM corporate headquarters is. And I was working in Armonk. I said, geez, I'd love to do it. So he says, well, I've got all these pictures and everything. So at the show, at one of the office buildings, it's a Corvette club meeting. And there's Corvettes everywhere. And Dom has got the Corvette there. He's got a picture, I think you might have seen it, of me sitting in the car. We duplicated the picture. And we had the picture taken 65 years later. You know, I'm like, you know, I mean, come on. So we did the show together, and we struck up a friendship. We had a lot in common. So what I brought to the table is, yes, I'm the last living soul that actually drove the car at Le Mans.
That's an accomplishment in and of itself.
Oh, and
Staying
I
alive.
actually could shift. One thing you might find kind of interesting, there was a picture of me with the Rangers. I got very involved with auto racing myself. And I raced Brabhams, etc., and I had Springdale Racing, and we had the March dealership, and we were so far over our head, it was unbelievable. My crew chief and stuff with our first Lotus, I had a Lotus 20. We were only in business for about 2 years. Fred Opert, do we know the name? Okay, there's some hands in the back there. Charlie Gibson, do we know that name? There's another hand in the back. These are all people. He was the first person that we sold a March to. So everything was starting to come around, and this guy gets me involved with the past years. So now I'm starting to rethink, and I do have pictures with a German Philips plastic camera that I took at Rennes, France. You know, I hooked up with Lance Raventlow at Rennes, France. I met Jill Sage. Oh, this is a great life. And he's opening up everything for me. And I'm going through these pictures. I said, oh my God, he'd love to see these. And here's the bird cage at Le Mans. Except it was an unbelievable experience, which I'm still experiencing. Well, I got to race here. My last race was in 1987 in a cup race, because my wife at that time was the merchandising manager for U.S. Tobacco. The Skull Bandit. Do we know the Skull Bandit? Well, she had to register all the products to sell, the licensing fees. And I was interested in buses, and I started a little bus company, and the chairman of the board of U.S. Tobacco said to Debbie, do you think Chuck could put together a bus trip to the Poconos? And we'll take U.S. Tobacco to see our Skull Bandit. Geez, Debbie comes to me and says, you're not going to believe what Lou wants to do. I said, well, I can do that. I have a lot of people that know buses. So I had my restored 1964 Greyhound. True, 35-foot Greyhound. And I got some of my friends with buses. We show up in Greenwich, Connecticut at corporate headquarters. Everybody's getting on. And I was doing fine until I got to the track. And I started hearing the cars. I was bit again. So I started to get back into racing. So I went to the Buck Baker. Oh, okay, more hands are going up on that one. Well, I kind of joined forces, became partners with him for about 3 years. And the last thing that I wanted to do was not sit on a porch, because we got very involved with the Skull Bandit. Oh, I even dipped for a while. Oh, I have my cup, right? And I said, I'm not going to sit on the back porch of a house in a rocking chair and say, I should have done that. So after the Buck Baker driving school, of which Jeff Gordon showed up shortly thereafter. So I went to the school, did some races, some ARCA races, and the last race was in August in the cup race. Rusty Wallace won the race. And I started last, but guess where I finished? Last. It was an experience, and I did it. I got out of the car, got into my Pontiac station wagon and drove home. And do you think I was high? I had done it, and it was over. So, and then in between there, the other fantasy was hockey, and I was the practice goalie for the New York Rangers from 1968, 1969 up until 82. And the first time in the locker room, does anybody follow hockey here? Okay, some hands are going up. Have we heard of Eddie Jockerman, Jill Villemere? I'm in the locker room, they're putting their pads on. I'm actually shaking. So I did that for 11 years, and while I was with IBM, and IBM loved it. Oh my God. You know, you've got to come see a presentation that Chuck's putting on to the customers. He's a practice goalie, by the way, with the Rangers. So, and I used to bring in goalie sticks from Jockman and give them away, which was not bad, and I get the order, right? Which, gold cross pen. So anyway, listen, I'm going on and on and on. I don't know if anybody has a question, but that's kind of where we are.
We will invite questions in the end. We have one more surprise for you. First of all, let me just thank Chuck for being here with us. One more superstar in the world of Corvettes and Corvette racing. We are very privileged to have here with us tonight Laura Klauser. Laura is the General Motors program manager for all of GM's sports car racing programs. So she is the program manager for both Corvette Racing and Cadillac Racing. And she was kind enough to carve out a little bit of time from a very busy weekend and a very busy month and a very busy year and a very busy life. She was in Le Mans for a little more than 2 weeks and was only home for a very short period of time before coming to Watkins Glen. And after this, she's off to the next adventure. She is the only person I know who travels more than I do. And she is very rarely home, so it's really, really kind of her to give us a little bit of her time tonight. Please welcome Laura.
I really don't know how I follow something like this. This is impressive. We are not going to talk about how old I was or not existing.
Oh, yeah. You weren't even a gleam in your pappy's eye.
My parents might not have even been alive. I'm kidding. Although they were high school sweethearts, so I was relatively early on in their relationship with marriage. So very nice to see all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for celebrating the wonderful thing that is Corvette. Whether it's in the racing form or the production form, we truly do have the best fans and customers in the world for Corvette Racing and Corvette the brand. In fact, getting to know all the other OEs that we race against and developing good friendships and relationships with them, they are truly jealous of what we have in Corvette, which is quite an honor for us, especially representing General Motors up here, very much an honor for the company. So thank you, all of you, for the part that you play from that standpoint. So here we are at Watkins Glen. We've got our brand new GT3 car that launched this year. Qualifying went well. So it's going to be quite a very busy race. The grid is very full, which means that it's been challenging to get a free lap during practice session. Qualifying was nice to finally see what are the cars actually capable of, because we really couldn't assess that with the practices. But now we're going to get back into everyone's on track at the same time, and a lot of tomorrow is going to be staying out of trouble, which sometimes you just need a little bit of luck in racing, and that's how you can be successful. So we're looking forward to that. But pretty much, I think you said you wanted to wait till questions at the end, or do you want to open up?
You're welcome to.
Yeah. Instead of me rambling on, I'd rather just know, what do you guys want to know, and I can answer your questions. That's easier for me. But.
I have a question.
Yes, Richard, what is your question?
Can you just briefly explain to people where Corvettes are racing, who's racing them this year? Because most of the fans are, even the really devoted fans, are so used to the one full factory program that raced for 20 plus years, and now I find that people are oftentimes a little bit confused about who's racing where.
That's a fair point. Yes, we were doing the same thing in Corvette racing for over 20 years, and then we changed it. Dun, dun, dun. It's been fun. So what has happened in the history behind that? We have always been in a class that was factory GT racing. That was an offering that was available in IMSA and then also over at Le Mans. And we've been taking advantage of that. Well, that offering has gone away. So at the end of the GTLM class in IMSA, and then at the end of the GTE class at WEC/Le Mans, which was last year, was the last year for that, the world of GT has pivoted to the GT3 platform for GT racing. So how GT3 works is it is a customer racing based platform, meaning that per regulations, anyone who makes a GT3 car has to build at least 20 of them in the first 2 years of the homologation for the race car. And the intent and the spirit of the rules are that you're going to sell those cars and they are going to race wherever GT3 cars could race. So when we got the news that that's what IMSA was going to be changing to, and that's what the WEC was going to be changing to, we said, okay, this is going to be a really cool opportunity for us to expand the Corvette racing family, to put Corvettes in series that really we had never been able to do in the past because they weren't eligible to race, and to meet new teams out there and build new relationships with different entities. So what we are doing this year, IMSA is one of the few GT3 series that still allows you to have a full pro lineup. So we have Pratt Miller running our pro cars in IMSA here, racing here tomorrow. And then we have an amateur team that races in GTD, which is AWA. They have a single car entry right now running with Ori Fidani being the bronze driver that is behind the wheel of that car, complemented with a silver and a gold driver for his lineup. And then across the pond, the team that was just racing at Le Mans, races in the WEC, is called TF Sport. They are located in the UK, so they're a British team. They have always been a fierce competitor over at Le Mans. They were running Aston Martins prior to switching to Corvette. We have been very pleased with how well they're doing. We've learned a lot through this customer racing experience, and we've definitely learned that, how we can help get everyone up to speed with different ways, and then things that you have to let the team do on their own because they are a customer. So after we made it through Le Mans this year, I'd say we have quite a to-do list of how to get better for next year, but the team has been right there with us hand in hand, which is exciting for us to keep growing there. And then we have a team, DXDT, that races 2 Corvettes in SRO North America. So they come to tracks similar to the ones that IMSA races at. They are a sprint racing series though, so their longest race is 60 minutes. And they actually accomplished the first win for the platform. So in COTA, they won not only race 1, but race 2, because they do doubleheader weekends with the Corvette. So that was super exciting. That's just the start. We are going to be growing. In fact, Richard mentioned that I'm not in the country much longer after this race. On Tuesday, Christy Bagney, who's the GT3 program manager, and I get on the plane and head over to Belgium. We're going to be at the Spa 24 race. We will not have a Corvette in the race, but we will be interfacing with all the teams over there, as well as the other OEs that we race against in GT3. And the thought is to continue to build our network and relationships and figure out where we're going to place the next handful of cars, as we're up to, I think we're building number 12 right now, or something along those lines. So super exciting to see where we're going to go. We have potentials in Europe, we have potentials in Asia, and then we can always grow grids here in the US as well between SRO and IMSA. So more Corvettes will be popping up. Yes.
I typically write Richard my technical questions. Sometimes he answers, sometimes he doesn't.
I only answer when I know the answer.
Yeah, usually they wind up in a magazine. So the technical question I have, and I'm the Corvette racing reporter for 2 Corvette clubs, and we've been talking with some of the issues that have transpired. Clarify for us. The Z06 engine and all of the accessory and all the auxiliary parts are a carryover from prior GT3R racing. Starter motors, alternators, clutches, and yet we see some issues with those basic parts in the current car, and a lot of us are saying, why are we having problems with these when we think that these are carryover parts from prior years, and why are we having issues?
Okay, I think I can tackle this. We're going to back up a second though. The race car that we launched in 2020, the C8R, was not production spec. So we used the C8R as the very first LT6 form of the engine to start working with it before you knew about the Z06 that came a couple years later, which actually was very challenging in the racing aspect. Some of the timing got delayed due to COVID and all those type of things, but we had to race the race car and not really talk about the engine because we didn't want to give anything away on the production side for, I think, almost 2 years before we were allowed to actually start speaking about it. That's why you never saw any pictures of the engine or the car missing pieces that you could see the engine. That was all something that we had to be extremely careful about. So the engine that was in the C8R was, the first go at it, it was purpose-built for that race car. And then we took those lessons and learnings and we brought that back to production so that they could make the production version of the LT6 even better. Then, full circle, we launched the GT3 car, here this year. The engine that is in the GT3 car is about 90% production components. So it is almost identical to the engine that is in any one C8 Z06 that happens to be lucky enough to have one. What is different is we've packaged it a little bit lower in the race car. So we made some modifications to the sump underneath so that it can sit lower in the car. But everything above is all production that you see in there. Parts like the alternator and some of those accessory drives are not production. They are built for the race car. And the reason being is the packaging to meet the rules and regulations for the GT3 class, we had to move some stuff around. The rear node in the back of the car is unique to the race car. The frame that the car is built around comes from Bowling Green. So that is just like the Corvettes that you guys own and love. The cage, obviously, that we build in is unique to the race car. And then the body panels, we use the production body panels as the starting point and inspiration, but they're made out of carbon. So they are purpose-built for the race car as well. So we have kind of a mix of some of the production, but the main components that are production are the frame and then the engine itself. And then the rest of it are built around racing. So now, some of the parts that we're using in the C8 GT3 were very similar to what we ran in C8R. So we have been working between the two and understanding the lessons that we could carry over. We did still find some unique things. It is no secret that the launch of the car in Daytona for the GT3 was a little rough. But for those with short memories, when we launched the C8R in 2020, that Daytona was a little rough too. So it's kind of a symptom of a brand new race car. Not making excuses, but there is no GT3 car so far that has launched without problems for the first couple races. And a lot of it is IMSA starts us off at the Super Bowl. We literally have the 24-hour race as the very first race for the car, which is challenging in any aspect. But what has been really inspiring and a huge amount of credit goes to Christy, the GM team that supports her, the Pratt & Miller team that supports the program. If you look at what happened in Daytona and compare it to what we just had in Le Mans, we had a couple things in Le Mans we were working on, but the cars finished. They both took the checker. It was such a huge step forward, and we're very excited, that we feel like we've got our arms around a lot of the things we were dealing with back in Daytona, and we've done a lot of hardening of the car and made it stronger. The alternator has been definitely a sticking point. We've done a little bit of work too, but we're getting there. And rappel on wood, it was not an alternator failure at Le Mans, so that was super exciting.
Thank you very much.
Of course. So you can answer now when you get text that. See one in the back.
The Corvette Challenge was such a big thing. Will that ever come back in the world of racing and marketing?
It's funny. So I didn't even know we did a Corvette Challenge until I've started coming to corrals and these things, and everyone keeps bringing up Corvette Challenge. So I appreciate that you guys all were excited about it, but I kid. So we have looked at stuff along those lines. I will say this, we really need to get a full arm around grasp of what we're doing with this GT3 program and how we support our customers before we go chasing something like that. What we don't want to do is bite off more than we can chew, and we leave people that are buying these cars out to dry because we just don't have the manpower or the support to make sure that everyone's successful. So it's been, and it's actually why we have released the cars so slowly in the grand scheme of things, and why you only see 7 race cars now running around the world versus maybe doing all 20 at once. We wanted to step into this so that we left our customers in a situation where when they needed something, they could pick up the phone and call and get us, and we weren't busy chasing somebody else's problem. So I'd say that it's going to take us probably a couple years to really feel like we've got our feet on the ground solid, and we've got a GT3 program that is healthy, that the customers have what they need, that we're able to grow at the rate we want to grow, and then we could consider something along those lines. So, yes. Yes.
Are you satisfied with where the standing is so far with the GT3 program? Was it progressed to where you kind of expected to at this point? Would be my first question. I have a second question, which is big news today of Camoradi leaving Cadillac wheeling arena. Is there any word is still going to be Cadillac driver with another team, or do you know anything about what's going on there?
We'll do the Cadillac one first because it's easy. We're not ready to talk about drivers for next year yet, so sorry. And for the Corvette question, I would say that when we were getting ourselves ready to go to Daytona this year, we knew that it was not going to be perfect. Again, if you look back at history, there is no such thing as a perfect launch. It was all going to be about how we reacted to everything that we dealt with. Now, was the list a little bit longer than we were hoping for at Daytona? Yeah, it was. But we very quickly formed the SWAT team, if you will, that's been chasing down every issue that came up. Not one issue has been brushed under the rug. They are all tracked, they are all statused regularly. And that, considering and looking how we progressed from Daytona being the first race and as we went race by race, Christy has a great chart that I love, that she lists out each of the issues that we had, and then she tracks it race by race, and you can see, you know, red was, we have this issue, yellow was, we got a plan, we're getting there, green was, it's solved, and you can watch the red like decrease and the green increase. And I mean, that frankly is why we were able to do what we did at Le Mans, finish with both cars and not have all the issues that we saw back at Daytona. So I am very, very proud of the work that everyone's done. And I'd say at this point, you know, if we had had a Le Mans similar to Daytona, that would have been a big deal and a problem. But since we did not, we see, like, okay, we were able to get our hands around all of this, and I think it's a bright future for GT3 and Corvette. Yes.
So at the start of the season, there were 2 cars in GTD, and now down to 1. What is happening with the second car? Are they not contractually obligated to be racing that car or doing something with it?
This is the fun part of customer racing. This is why factory racing in some ways is a lot easier, because you have a lot more control. When you own the budget for the whole thing and you know, are picking your team, you're picking drivers, you're picking all the things along that. With customer racing, we are at the mercy of what the customer is going to do. We are very selective about what teams we're working with, and we try to vet as much as we can. But at the end of the day, if a driver, and in the case of AWA, each of the bronze drivers own those vehicles, if he decides he doesn't want to do this anymore for whatever his reasons, there's nothing we can do to tell him otherwise, right? It's his money. He can choose to make that decision. And since he owns the car, it's his car. So where it's going to land or who's going to buy it, we're not sure. We're kind of waiting to see, like the rest of the world, to find out. But at this moment in time, we're not entirely sure where it is, but it's stored somewhere, probably collecting dust. And as he's trying to work out where he's going to move it along. But I'd say that this has been probably the biggest lesson for our leadership to learn, and then for us too, is that you can't control everything, and that sometimes you have to just react, or you have to roll with the punches and make sure that you set up who you have for success and try to, you know, convince them to be good partners and show them the benefit of being good partners. The more that you lean in to letting us be partners, the more we can provide you with support and help you be successful. Yes.
I actually have a question for Chuck. So, you know, what you got to do is, you know, quite inaccessible today. Where do you think racing is really going, and, you know, how is it getting to see it now, I guess?
The big complaint that I have, because I was out of racing for a while, is this IMSA series was very confusing to me. I'll be the first to tell you. I'm trying to read the different classes. Dom and I are struggling because it is really relatively new, because this Corvette deal with Dom got me back into it. I've always been a fan of Formula One. I don't like the telecast. They don't do a thing for me. They're talking about non-issues, and I want to learn more about Formula One, but it's almost after the opening lap, it's a non-event. I'd like to see the media, and I'd like to see Chevrolet, etc., try to reach out and put it in a terms that everybody understands. I mean, why does it have to be so confusing? And I thought I understood some of it. So that would be, but racing to me, when you look at, I mean, I look at a guy like Kyle Larson. He's not human. He is not human, I can tell you right now. 7 years ago, in the sprint cars, I saw him and I told Joanne, I said, this guy is ridiculous. And it turns out he is ridiculous. The guy can drive anything. You gotta be kidding. He does with a sprint car, a midget, it doesn't matter. That was fun. I really understood that. I could see the competition, and I understood totally what was going on. But honestly, I was a little lost today. I saw the first races today. Let's see, they have the white numbers and the yellow numbers, and this is the JV team, and tomorrow was the varsity. I mean, that's kind of where I was. And so you asked me, where is racing going? It's not going down. NASCAR is having some problems, there's no question. I was very involved with it, with the Skull Bandit. And the names that we all know, Bobby Allison, And, you know, those are names that we can relate to. But I don't know if everybody's relating to it as much. And we're trying, like IBM, hey, the customer's right. There's a culture. So let's keep the culture there. Let's get the customer. You've got to listen to them. What do they want to see? So I'm going on, and I apologize, but hopefully that
No,
is.
I didn't.
I also have a question for Chuck and Dom, and maybe also Richard, maybe kind of all three of you. Yeah, if you want to go up to the mic, up to you. Obviously, everything that's happened with the 1960 Corvette is really incredible and so full of history, and you know, you guys tell it in a really fascinating and incredible way. Simultaneously, obviously, you know, there's so much of it there, and I guess what I kind of want to know is, do you ever foresee it being told in a long format, sort of physical way? Do you ever foresee it becoming like a book, or much more sort of so that, you know, other folks, obviously we're all car fans
I've asked
here.
them to write my book.
Because we're
Yeah.
all car fans.
I can
we're
answer
Corvette
that.
fans.
Dominick has grand visions and no limits, and has already asked me repeatedly to write a book, and I keep encouraging him to write a book.
So maybe it's a little bit
Yeah,
of a cool effort.
it's book worthy because of the people, and we only really scratched the surface. You could write a book about Lloyd Lucky Kastner, one of the epic con men / geniuses of racing in America and on the international stage. So yeah, it's worthy of it. The problem for me personally is books have to be a labor of love. Car books are not a good way to earn a living. And so I'm already kind of cramming 3 lifetimes into the 1 lifetime that I have, between my devotion to, I do the photography for General Motors sports car racing programs, Corvette and Cadillac Racing. I do production car photography for GM and other car companies. Even though the editorial world has shrunk dramatically just in the last few years, I'm still writing 3 or 4 articles every month, and I write a column every month. And I have a family to attend to, and my beloved dogs to tend to, and the car hobby. Every time I go away on a long trip, my wife or my son brings another project car home. So the short answer to your question is yes, it deserves either a book on its own, or certainly to be part of a larger book. And I think it'll happen one day. It's just not the right time, certainly for me, but it could be the right time for Dominick.
Yes, and yes, but kind of thing.
Yes, yeah, and
The article in the Vet News magazine just came out.
there you go.
Just got it today, or the other day.
So thank you for your question.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Since the Corvette and its racing program are not fun, and especially with the production of racing Corvettes trying so many parts, as I know the Cadillac's going to lose the V8, that makes me sad for the Blackwing series, but will GM dive more into electric racing to improve the future electric lineup for Cadillac, and also make fun electric vehicles? I don't want boring electric cars, I want fun electric cars.
There's no such thing.
Oh.
We need to understand the fun. No, so electric racing is a very interesting topic. At the moment, if we look at what we love about what we do in sports car racing, long 24-hour endurance races at circuits like Le Mans with a 3-mile straight, the electric technology is not there to support that right now. In Le Mans, I don't even know how many laps you would get in a car like that before you have to come in and charge, because you're at watt quite a bit for that situation. But so what we are doing, especially with the hypercar with the Cadillac, is to find a way to mate the electric technology of the hybrid with the combustion engine, and to really get the goodness out of both. So what that means is that we've solved the problem of drivers not being able to launch the car out of the pits, because now they do push a button, the electric motor takes them out, the engine fires up before they hit the track, and away they go. So, and then also the electric engine will give us a boost depending on where we're at on the track, and help us control the power to the regulations that we have on the torque axle in the back of the car. So it's finding those ways to incorporate both and lean on each other. And it's been fantastic learning for us because yes, there's still the combustion engine in the car, but the control system that we have to create to power everything and how we get it to talk to each other and integrate, and what we're doing with the braking system and how we're regenerating energy from that. That is all good knowledge that can help us as we look to an electric future with production as well. Plus the simulation work that we do. We have a ton of lightweighting studies happen to get mass out of the car, learning new materials, new technologies there that we can then apply into production. I mean, we've gotten to the point at GM that 3D printing happens on the production line. We 3D print parts for our trucks, and that is big volume that we produce out of the plants every day. So this is stuff that we spearhead in racing, and then we bring it forward to production. So it's trying to see the goodness out of the opportunities available, but in terms of seeing a fully electric race, Formula E definitely is getting better each year that they go, but I don't see an electric car replacing what we do at Rolex 24 here at Watkins Glen at Le Mans in the near future. I think that's probably not even in the medium future. We got a little bit while to go from a technology standpoint, mainly with charging and how we would bring the battery in and get it all juiced up again.
Good, don't hurry.
I know, well, and I will say, I you know, it was funny when we launched the Cadillac, we weren't sure how marketing was going to react to it because we are looking at the EVs with the Cadillac, but then you listen to the Cadillac LMDH car launch, and if you don't smile when that engine fires off, something is wrong with you. So and they jumped right in and embraced it. I mean, we are unofficially the best sounding race car, I think, on the track, frankly. But that's a very biased opinion. But a lot of people have told me that too, so I do have data.
Okay.
So, all right, we got a bunch of them.
Go ahead.
I can make that official. I had British people tell me the American car sounded the best at Le Mans, so there you go. I had a question kind of on the development cycle. It's the second year, if I'm correct, the second year of the Cadillac, new Cadillac prototype. What kind of changes from the first year of the development cycle to the second year? What kind of lessons have you learned from that first year, and what are you kind of trying to do? What's your kind of goals you want to accomplish in that second year of development?
A lot of our areas that we were able to work on was the control system, and a lot of that's based on the fact that that is not constrained as much from the homologation. We cannot change any body panels on the car. We are strictly locked into what we submitted. The engine, we can't really modify that too much. It's all, those things are locked down. So really, it's the electrons, that how they talk to each other and how the systems work. That's the stuff that we can work on and change. So we've looked at our control systems. We've worked with the suppliers that support us there, seeing how can we be more efficient and how everything talks to each other so we're not overloading systems. So I'd say the biggest gain that we had from Rolex last year to Rolex this year and Le Mans to Le Mans was that. We know the car better now, and everything talks to each other and the systems much better.
Thank you.
I'm the mic guy.
I believe the ACO, especially this year, has been sort of trying to generate interest and trying to generate class going forward for not electric vehicles, but hydrogen-powered vehicles. I recall several years ago now, GM Chevrolet had a pilot program for a hydrogen-powered Equinox here in New York. Is that something that GM would look into for racing, or based on the outcome of that pilot program, is that technology GM's not really interested in pushing forward with?
We still have some hydrogen work. We actually joined forces with Honda a few years back to work on the hydrogen space. I think just making sure that we keep our toes in any technology that's out there. I would say that yes, we're sitting in those meetings where they're trying to figure out how that looks. The years keep getting pushed in terms of when that would launch. So I think we're at the moment sitting at the table listening, seeing what they're coming up with, doing a little bit of studies behind the scenes, but we need to get a little further along with that technology as well, similar to electric. It needs to be at a point where it makes sense. Sometimes we as the OE can drive that. Sometimes the sanctioning body will just make up their mind that no fooling, this is what you're doing, either you're in or you're out. And in that case, we will make a decision.
I know that you guys are trying to compete in both IMSA and WEC with the Cadillac prototype, but I also heard that after Le Mans this year, there were some worries that the kind of carryover of being able to participate in both series might make you uncompetitive in the World Endurance Championship. Are there any upgrades that would be planned for the Cadillacs participating in the World Endurance Championship that may not be applicable to the ones in IMSA?
No, the car has to be the same. So if we make a change, it has to be approved and then therefore eligible to race in both. I would say that we're always working to make sure that we've got the best possible package, whether we're racing over in the WEC or we're racing in IMSA. But we're always shooting towards that win. So but at the end of the day, we won't be able to have changes that are only applicable to one series but not the other.
Does anybody have any more questions? You're welcome.
Will the potential Formula One program have any effect on the Cadillac sports car program?
We are very excited for the opportunity to grow motorsports with F1, and it will be a great addition to our motorsports package. You've never been able to tell. Does anybody have any more questions about some of the really cool things you guys were watching earlier too? Yeah. When are you coming back? We could use some extra help.
Yeah, I have my question. You briefly mentioned 3D printing on a mass scale in your assemblies. I know Cadillac recently released a documentary on the prototype, and in that mentioned that you used metal 3D printing for the first time ever in a race car. I was curious, what kind of process do you use for the 3D printing? I know there's a few ways to do metal 3D printing. And are you seeing, what kind of results are you seeing? Are you guys happy with the results that you're seeing? Are they living up to the stress test, thermal cycling, all that stuff? I'm just curious to see what you guys have thought of using 3D printed components in a race car.
I'm not an expert in this space, so I can't answer your first part of your question, but what I can tell you is what that has enabled us to do is to fully mass optimize the parts that we print. So one of the biggest pieces we have on the Cadillac that's printed is the oil tank, and the reason that, and it's big, the reason that we print that is that we can create a design that only has walls where we need them for the proper volume and the proper delivery to the engine, and no material anywhere else. And so we're able to pull substantial mass out of a part that if we tried to machine it, we would have had to carry all this extra bit for either hooking it into the machining portion or because you just couldn't machine around that piece. And in terms of how it's holding up, we have now completed our 4th 24-hour race with the platform. Those components have all been rock solid. Again, big rock and wood. But no, we're very, very pleased with how that's all worked out. In fact, I think it's pretty much the gold standard going forward for as we design engines and what we want to do there. Because mass is frankly the #1 enemy of a race car. There's other things that people like to talk about, but if you're too heavy, you have such an impact of everything else you're trying to do that it becomes a problem. And if the mass is in the wrong spot of the race car, that makes it challenging as well, and that can really mess up setup and things that you're working through. So anytime we can pull mass out, we're looking into that. And then the sanctioning body adds it back with BOP, but that's a different discussion.
Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you to Laura. Thank you very much for your time. I know it's super, super valuable given your ridiculous schedule.
Anything for you, Richard.
Well, I'll let Kip say the final words, but before I turn the mic over to him, I just want to say on my behalf, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of the Teslas and Chuck as well, thank you very much for joining us this evening, for your questions, and certainly for your enthusiastic support for Corvette Racing, the Corvette Racing program, and for the production cars. Both Corvettes and everything else that GM makes. I'm going to just go out on a limb here and say that there are a few Corvettes in the garages, and maybe some Escalades, some pickup trucks pulling the car trailer, pulling the boat trailer, etc. So thank you very, very, very much, because if you did not support the racing and the company, we would all have to find honest work, and that's the last thing in the world any of us want. So thank you very much.
Well, I don't know about you, but I thought that was just fantastic. I want to thank Zora for coming down again. She did this last year, and it was amazing. I want to thank Richard. I want to thank Dominick. I want to thank, the show was really all about Chuck Schrodel. And I have come to know, well, I had not met Chuck until yesterday, and I can't wait to hang out with this guy more. He's just so good. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I believe everybody's going to go back over to the center, but we need to get Richard out of here relatively quickly. He has a long day ahead of him tomorrow. Did you bring any books?
I do have books in my car
Richard,
if anybody's interested.
Some of you might have brought the book that he wrote last year, Corvette at 70, the one and only. I think he has other copies. If you would like to buy a book, he is available to sell a book. And otherwise, you can check with Dom or his wife or Chuck. And thank you.